Hey guys, Mark Flocker here. Today we're going to talk about the different home types. So I got a question recently that was asking about what are the different home types, so like the types of brick versus a two-story home versus a one-story home, and how does that affect my insurance. So today we're going to go over the 5 most common home types, and I might add a couple extra in there just from experience. And then I'm going to show you some examples of what they are and the types of materials and how they increase or decrease your rates on your home insurance. So there's over 32 different types of homes. There's your Victorians, there's your farmhouses, your contemporary, your moderns, your Victorians, ranch style, 1.5 story, 5-story houses. There's a ton of different styles of houses. So the 5 most common that we're going to go over, the first one we're going to talk about is your ranch style house. This is typically a 1-story home. It's got a medium slope roof. You're not going to find a whole lot of special details about it. More often than not, in your ranch style house, you're going to have about 1,000 to 1,200, maybe up to 2,000 square foot. It's not a large home. It's kind of just your square box. And this is a very, very common type of house. It's just not high in replacement cost. So most often than not, they're not using those high-end materials. So they're not using, like rocks and stones on the outside of the house. It's usually vinyl or aluminum, which is very common. You've got your standard sloped shingled roof, things like that, and you've got windows, standard doors. Very, very common in these homes. They do typically have slider doors, either in the front or the back. Usually the back going onto a porch, or a deck or something like that. So that's the most common type of house that there is. Long, low-pitched roofs. They're going to usually have an attached garage, typically 2-stall garage. You're going to see the sliding doors that we talked about. They do make a lot of these homes out of brick. So you're going to see a lot of brick style houses. They make a lot of them out of just your standard 2x4s, so your wood type homes. And they also made a few of these houses out of stone. Now, a lot of people are thinking in their minds, okay, so what's the difference between a ranch style house and a raised ranch? So a raised ranch, there's actually a flight of steps that go up. So you actually have to go in and up to get into that. That's kind of your raised ranch. Very similar to what people call a bi-level, which we'll go over in just a second. The bi-level is typically 2 stories. It's a house, so imagine a square block and it's split into 2, but it's not a second story. So when you go in the front doors, you'll see, I'll actually show you a picture here. When you go in this front door, you're gonna come into a landing, you're gonna have the option to either go up or down. Most commonly, you'll have a lower floor, and then directly above that, you're either going to have bedrooms or a living room, and then adjacent to that, you're also going to have living space. So typically your kitchen or some sort of like space that you're going to be living out of, your living room and things like that. More often than not, in this type of house, you're going to see what's called a split roof design, and that's one of the features that does add a tiny amount of cost. So you're going to have your roof is going to come and split into different sections. Typical with bi-levels, you're going to see like bay windows, larger like picture frame windows. You're going to have your standard material as well. The biggest thing that you got to know about these is when they're asking for your square footage, you include the lower level because it's not a basement. Part of it is above ground, and that counts as living space. So with with these types of houses, there is no basement. It's most likely on a concrete foundation. Even though it's technically underground, that lower portion is not considered the basement. These houses typically have a built-in garage. So you usually have a 1 or 2 stall garage built in, and then above that garage is where that living space is. So then very similar to that is the third one, which is called a split level. And a split level is very, very similar, except it has more levels. So a bi-level only has 2. You come into a landing, you either go up or down, where a split level has 3 or 4 or whatever. So you're gonna come into a landing, you can go up to get to the living room and up to get to some bedrooms, or down to get to some living space down below. Same situation, there's not technically a basement, although some do. I've been in one that has had a basement, which was way, way lower than the ground. It was weird. You're not going to see it very often, but there are those split levels with basements. More often than not, it's going to be a concrete foundation, still going to have similar built-in garages, very, very similar. From the outside looking straight at the house, you can't tell the difference between the bi-levels and the split levels because the interior is really what determines it. It's where you go once you go into the house and how many steps or how many levels you have to go into. So here's a really good example of that. We're going to show you the difference between a bi-level. These are some photos I found online versus a split level, and that's going to show you pretty much the levels that you're going to be typically seeing these types of houses. The materials are very common. Most of these houses have fireplaces. You've got vinyl siding very commonly. Some are mostly brick, not usually all brick, so you'll have like 60 or 70% brick, which adds a lot of premium to your rebuild cost. Whenever you have a brick home, that price is going to go up $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in what we call our replacement cost estimator. I hope you're sticking with me. At the end of this video, I'm going to retouch on a video I've already made, but it's going to go over the replacement cost estimator and what value that adds. But let's go through to the third house, which is called a bungalow. A bungalow is very, very common. It's also called an American craftsman style house. And this house is pretty straightforward. It's very similar to the single story, but it can have more levels, but it's usually a straight line back. So it's the closest to a square that you're gonna find. The roofs are typically pitched really heavy, so you're gonna have a lot more repair. If the roof has to be replaced, you're gonna have a little extra cost because you're gonna have to pay that extra fee for the larger space of the roof. Now, the reason they did that was because when these houses were originally built, it wasn't meant for the cold weather, the snow, or the heavy rains and things like that. So what they did is they made the roofs really steep so that they can get the water and snow and any weather away from the house as quickly as possible. These types of houses are going to have really long overhangs. And so what that means is you're going to have the house ends here, but the roof is going to overhang another 6, 7, 8, 10 inches, and so that the water can go further away from the house and try to protrude away. Some common features: almost every time you're going to see a front porch on these houses. You're also going to see that those overhangs are right there. They're going to have steep roofs. A lot of times they're going to have like dormers, or they're going to have these built-in windows. Commonly you're going to see these houses in places like Michigan. In Michigan, in the Detroit area. In the 20s, they built a ton of these houses, so this is a very common. These tend to be more expensive to insure because of the concrete. They're using a lot of heavy materials, so if there was a total loss on this type of house, you're gonna have to rip the whole thing down, replace it. There's a lot more cost involved to build that same type of house. That leads us to the fourth most common that I see is a Cape Cod home. And this one always gets me because I never call anything a Cape Cod when I'm putting it in a policy. It's usually like a 1-story, a 1.5 story. That's like a Cape Cod style house. They have these dormers that go to nothing. Sometimes they do. Sometimes there's a room and it's got that window and it's got its own little mini roof, and that's a dormer. So that dormer, if you're in a home that has it built into the house, great, it looks awesome. But more often than not, it was a design feature just to make it look nicer. So they built these like fake dormers where they lead to nothing. They just go to the attic. And so it looks great from the outside, but there's no actual functionality in that. So there's a little bit of extra cost for things like that. Different roof shapes. Roof designs are what charge more for when they have a multi-angle roof. More commonly in this type of house, if in a Cape Cod, you're gonna have the door centralized, although they have changed quite a bit. So the door pretty much goes wherever it fits. The garages are attached, so not built into the house. They're usually part of. You'll see different examples here. The most common is a 1.5 story. You're gonna see that. So there usually is a loft or some sort of living space above that. And that's gonna add some extra living space or square footage. It's great when you're buying it. It's great when you're selling it. But when you have to insure it, you have to insure that rebuild cost. I need to have that living space back if my house completely burned down tomorrow. And the fifth, the big guy, the big girl, it's a Victorian. They also call them a Queen Anne, I believe is the name of it. These things are massive. I have a few of them in my neighborhood. You'll see them every so often. These are like your castle style houses. They're not made of brick, but they are typically gonna have wood siding, sometimes wood roofs. They're going to have architectural shingles on there, which is going to be like a higher grade shingle. They have little designs in them. They almost always have a turret, and that's kind of like an upside down ice cream cone, I guess you could call it. So they have like these bay windows. That's where it looks like a castle, right? These designs, very, very common for this to have what's called gingerbreading. And gingerbreading took me a while to figure this out and like it sink in the last few years because it's just a weird name. It's like it's very difficult to describe, so I'll just show you some photos. But it's basically the build of the house has all these little designs in the wood. So around the windows, they've got these little crisscrossed wood pieces that make it look neater, and they have all these gingerbreading designs. It's kind of like a cookie cutter thing, and these were so unique. More often than not, you're going to see these bright colors. It just was the way they built them. They always painted them bright green, bright pink, bright whatever. You've probably seen it now that you're thinking of those colors. It's very elaborate, has lots and lots of windows, usually has a porch. So some common things, you're going to have some round angles, turrets, you're going to have stained glass, and that's going to have the gingerbreading around the stained glass. You're going to see bright colors. They did derive from the Queen Anne. That was kind of that period, or the person, or whatever you want to call it, that created this design, and this was in the 1800s. So these are a lot older houses. You're not going to see a lot of them being built new today because it's just not a common thing. Now, when you're quoting those with insurance, the thing that a lot of people don't realize is you've got to determine something very important, because this can be the difference between insuring that house at $350,000 or $550,000. There's one button that changes the whole thing, and that's called functional replacement cost. What that is you determine if you want to have functional replacement versus full replacement. And functional, what that is you don't get the gingerbreading back. You don't get the little dolphin design that was built into the windows. When you see the window, it might have like a cross built into it with like some swerves, and that's kind of that gingerbreading thing we're talking about, right? Well, that design, if you choose functional, that window comes out and a Pella window goes in. It's just a standard 2-pane glass or whatever that quality was that was equal to, you're going to get that back. So if you want that beautiful design, that extra design, you're going to pay a few $100s more a year to have that insured correctly. And I'm going to skip past the 3 very common ones after this. I'll make a completely different video for you guys. We're going to talk about mobile homes, manufactured homes, and modular homes. What's the difference between the 3, how insurance looks at that, and what effect it's going to have either on premium or whether you're just looking to purchase or build one. So if you stayed to the end, like I promised, I'm going to go over some of the replacement cost pieces. So this is more for like an agent that is just curious. When you're looking at materials, when you're thinking in your head, okay, what's the value? If I were to just pick up a picture of a house right now and look at it, I'm going to say, okay, great. This has vinyl siding. 30% of it's brick. That's going to add a little bit of cost to that replacement cost. Do they want that? Is it a really old home? Does it have functional replacement costs? Am I going to get disqualified because the piping in the house is galvanized pipes and they don't like that? If it's an older house, is the electrical updated? Do they have a 150 amp circuit breaker? Or do they have fuses or knob and tube? So which company do I work with that's either going to exclude that or allow that? There are companies I work with that allow that type of material. That's going to add to either disqualification or the price. Now also we're going to be looking at some of the extra structures. Are they on a farm? Do they have a giant barn that's $80,000 that they just built last year? Do they have a separate structure that needs to be excluded or not? And then now you've got to determine which company is going to allow you to write that. So there's a lot of different home designs. You got to really look at the materials. Now looking at the tiny pieces when you're first starting off, if you're quoting this for people or if you're looking at designs or just trying to get a quick way to determine this, you always want to look at the house at a 10,000 foot view because the features and everything doesn't necessarily change it that much. It's not going to make that large of a difference. Having carpet, knowing if it's 10% hardwood floor, paint versus having paper on the walls, those really don't make that large of a difference. If you were to add all that stuff up and it was completely different than what you did, you're probably dealing with $100 a year different. So if it's the person that cares that much, sure, dig that far into it. I'm not saying that you should go that far and not do that information, but it makes sense when you're first looking at it until you've got commitment, look at that first. The large thing that you are going to notice is with your older homes, so 1920s on older, you're going to typically find that they either have drywall or sheetrock. And if they have sheetrock or stucco, that price is very expensive because it's a mud with wood behind it. So you've got like shiplap, and that is not cheap to remove. And if they want it back and they don't do full replacement or the functional replacement cost, that's going to be expensive. The most common thing that I see that changes the price on home insurance is when I quote somebody a house, everything is correct except for we quoted it as being a stick-built house and it was a brick house. That can literally change the price of a house $50,000. And that will knock up the bill about $300 to $400 depending on what area you're in. So you may want to make sure that at least get an eye on it. quoting it correctly. I hope this was helpful, guys. Definitely subscribe if you want more of this information. If you have questions below, I'd love to answer them. If you want more videos like this, I know I split it up at the end where I went over more of the agent's piece of it. If you're interested in that and you guys think that would be some good advice or good value, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to make some more of those. I will see you in the next one.